Good morning and welcome to the Managing Meltdowns webinar. I am Sarah Smouse and I'm an early childhood behavior support specialist for the Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center, which is part of the Autism Training Center at Marshall University. Prior to joining the Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center in 2019, I was a pre-K special needs teacher in Hardy County for 10 years. So I've been with this agency assistance center for 3 years now almost. So just a little bit about our TA Center. We are a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education Office of Special Education and Early and Elementary Learning. So we have several different programs within our TA Center. We have a school-wide PBIS team, and PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Support. So the school-wide team works with grades, usually kindergarten through 12th grade. And you can see we have 4 of those behavior support specialists in the state. They're the large shaded in counties that you can see on the map. And then we have an early childhood PBIS team, and that consists of myself, Kate Morris to the south, and we have a state coordinator, Dr. Amy Carlson. We also have a mental health first aid program that's done by Diana Bailey Miller, and she covers the whole state. And we also have a Project Aware specialist that works with 3 counties in West Virginia. So I am the northern specialist, so I cover all of those counties with the blue triangles in the north. To let you know that we will be recording this and putting it on our West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center YouTube channel. So if you want to view it again, you can. I asked in the original webinar if you have any questions to save them to the end. So today we're going to talk about what a meltdown is, why they occur. We're going to talk about some de-escalation strategies. We're going to talk about the importance of co-regulation. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when the meltdown's over and how to prevent meltdowns in the future. So what comes to mind when you think of a meltdown? Usually we think of screaming, crying, aggression, whether it's verbal aggression or physical aggression, or just a general loss of control for the child. So we're going to look at the difference between a meltdown or a tantrum. So it's really important that we keep in mind how we describe a child's behavior, because our words that we use actually affect our perception and how we respond to that situation. So this is from Dr. Jim Ball. He has a book called You Can't Make Me about the different functions of behavior. And so he breaks down the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. And he says that a tantrum is kind of the old school way of describing a student's behavior. And there are some assumptions that come along with describing a child's behavior as a tantrum. So some assumptions are that the behavior is intentional or manipulative in an effort for the child to get what they want or to get out of something. There's the assumption that the child maintains some type of control during the episode, and that it's a learned behavior that will stop if it's ignored. And we tend to think of them as milder in their intensity. And he says a meltdown, on the other hand, is often thought of more, and he uses the term politically correct way to describe a child's behavior. But there are some assumptions that come along with it as well. We think of it as a total collapse or falling apart or loss of control. Like we just said in the previous slide, we may attribute it to regulation issues or sensory overload. We assume that the child has no control and that the child will not be able to stop until they're either worn out or they're able to be soothed by either a teacher or a parent or another caregiver. So Why is it important? Why do our words matter? Whether we call it a meltdown, a tantrum, a hissy fit, all kinds of ways to describe it. But our words do matter because, again, it's going to influence how we behave and how we act and we react in that situation. So we might think a tantrum, he knows better. He's just trying to get his way, or he deserves a consequence or some type of punishment for having that tantrum. When we think of a meltdown, sometimes we're more sympathetic and we think things like his life is so hard as it is, he's had a tough day today, or we'll just let it go this time. But how we perceive intentionality can either support or sabotage our best efforts. And again, that's from Dr. Jim Ball. So our wording is very important. We also have to do some detective work, really, to find out if it is misbehavior or if it's stress behavior, because there is a difference. So misbehavior is when a child is pushing boundaries or pushing buttons. They're actually able to make a different choice or make a better choice in that situation. They're not dysregulated. They're fully aware of what he or she was doing and that they should have not been doing it. So, for example, a child that goes over and knocks down another child's tower in the blocks, for example, just because they like to see the reaction of the child that built it. That would be a misbehavior, right? That child was consciously going over there and knocking down that block to get that reaction. But a stress behavior is when the child is not choosing to do that behavior. They're not able to do something different. They don't respond to punishment, and that punishment might often increase the behavior, and sometimes they shut down. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why stress behavior happens, but there is a difference between stress behavior and misbehavior. And I like this quote that says, learning to trust that children's challenging behaviors are likely due to stress helps us to see the whole individual and to approach the situation with thoughtful insight rather than anger or punishment. So some signs of stress behavior, that might be the heightened impulsivity. So they might be very quick to maybe hit another child or to scream out or to throw themselves down on the floor. So there's not a lot of think time there. They automatically do those types of things like hitting or screaming. They might have difficulty ignoring distractions. They might have persistent problems in mood and see everything as kind of negative, or even have mood swings. They may have trouble listening. And sometimes what they're saying might not make a lot of sense. So, for example, if they do a behavior such as hitting another child, they might say the reason for doing it is because they were mad because their mom gave them their cereal that morning in the blue bowl instead of the green bowl. It's very kind of dissociated, not really about what the current situation is. So it often doesn't make sense. And they might regress in behavior or have that regressive behavior, kind of like throwing themselves down on the floor, kicking and screaming, like a younger child might do. So Dr. Jed Baker has a great book. It's called No More Meltdowns. And his definition of a meltdown is an escalating negative emotional reaction. So the child starts out calm, something happens, which triggers them, and they escalate until they get to a peak of their meltdown, and then they start to calm. So to understand why meltdowns happen, we have to understand how the brain works. This is from another great doctor, Dr. Stuart Shanker. He does a lot of work on self-regulation and co-regulation, but he names 3 different parts of the brain: the blue brain, the red brain, and the brown brain. And so the blue brain is your neocortex. And this is the part of your brain that is in control of executive functioning. So your higher level thinking, problem solving, learning, memory, reasoning, all of that takes place in the learning brain or the blue brain. Your red brain is your limbic system, and that's the part of your brain that deals with feelings and social existence. And then you have the brown brain, and this is sometimes called the lizard brain or the reptile brain. It's the very primitive first part of the brain to develop in humans, and it's just focused 100% on survival. It controls the fight, flight, or freeze instinct when threats are detected, and it remembers these events for future reference. So when you think about this part of the brain, and it is called a lizard brain, you can think about a lizard, right? Being outside the world and everything around it's a lot bigger than that little lizard. So he's always looking around, looking for danger. And that's what this part of our brain does too, but it does it subconsciously. So we don't even know that it's happening, but our brain's always looking out for danger. But what our brain does altogether is it seeks balance and it seeks safety. And I just said that the brown brain too remembers these events for future reference. So if you think about when you're little and you burn your hand on a stove, for example, your brain will remember that so that you learn that hot things hurt. So after time, there's a pattern in your brain. Stay away from hot things. Hot things can hurt you. Stay away from hot things. Hot things can hurt you. So those patterns are really a protective skill. And so children who have been through trauma, trauma compromises our ability to engage with others by replacing patterns of connection with patterns of protection. So most children who haven't been through trauma, they create these patterns in their brain of connection. So they may think, I like Miss Sarah because Miss Sarah takes care of me like my mom does. Or I like the teaching assistant because she reads to me like my dad does. So there are patterns of connection. But with children who have been through trauma, they get these patterns of protection. So they might not trust adults. They may become fearful when an adult expresses anger or frustration because they have learned this pattern in their brain. When an adult gets mad, I get hurt. So remembering that patterns of protection are going on in some children with trauma's brain is very important. So our brain seeks balance and it seeks safety. So seeking balance, you can kind of think of like the red brain and the blue brain being on a seesaw, both of them going back and forth, up and down, with each brain working as a brake for the other, so one doesn't tip too far out of balance. So when the red brain is leaning too far, that's when your emotions are running really high. Something's triggered it. You're feeling very emotional, and that's when your blue brain will jump in, your learning, rational part of your brain, and will either try to use self-distraction or it will help you to resist a temptation. So I give the example that I live close to a major highway, and most people on that road shouldn't have a driver's license, honestly. Anytime that I get on there, I see things that, are just so dangerous that people do. And it gets my emotions running high because I have 3 children in the car with me. And so when the safety of my children is compromised by someone else's actions, it definitely gets me very emotional. But I might want to say words or use gestures that would convey my emotions. But my blue brain, my rational part of my brain reminds me that, I have children in the car and that wouldn't be a very good example for them. So it helps me resist those temptations to say or do things that I shouldn't. So that's the blue brain putting a brake on the red brain. Now, the blue brain can tip too far in one way as well. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I was really sick with a cold. But it was really getting me down. I hadn't been sick in a while. And But I had so much to do for work and for my kids and at home. And so I was really pushing myself, like, you have to do this and you have to do this. And then after that, we need to go here. But I was upstairs doing laundry, and this little voice said, "Look at that bed, Sarah. It looks so nice and comfy. Just lay down for a second." It's like, it's just a few minutes. You'll be fine. Then you can go do your work. But I actually laid down and slept for about 2 hours. So that was the red brain really kicking in and shutting down my blue brain that wanted to get so much stuff done, because your body needs rest when you're sick. But the blue brain just didn't have the sense to do it itself. So that red brain kicked in there and made me take a nap. So that's how they work together and balance themselves out. And that's really when children and adults are most curious and receptive, or when that red brain and blue brain are working together and they're balanced. But there are some occasions when that red brain will get tipped too far. And that's when challenging behaviors occur. So when the seesaw totally gets out of balance, that red brain is way out of whack, that's when the brown brain is actually going to jump in. The stress created by the situation and being in that red brain too far triggers that stress response, and the brown brain will jump in with a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And fight, flight, or freeze often equals a meltdown. So you see physical aggression, you see the screaming, which would be fight. You see the running away or hiding under tables, which would be flight, or the shutting down or freezing up, which would be freeze, of course. So then that leaves the blue brain with its little feet dangling in the air. And that's why reasoning with the child is not possible during a meltdown, because the blue brain just isn't able to do anything at this point. So we see a curve here. I call it the meltdown curve. And this is kind of the trajectory of what happens during a meltdown. So you start out with the child being calm, and then there's something that triggers that child, some type of stressor. And the child gets agitated. If they're not calmed or if it's not resolved, it will accelerate until they're at the very peak of their meltdown. And that's where you're going to see the most intense behaviors. And then de-escalation will occur. Either the child gets worn out or they're soothed by an adult or a caregiver. So then they de-escalate, and then they actually dip lower and have a post-crisis depletion. So having a meltdown is mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausting for a child. So sometimes they might fall asleep after having a meltdown. They'll have very low energy, and then they'll eventually come back up and recover and be calm again. But that's kind of the progression of a meltdown. And it's important to know this progression or curve to know when and what we can teach or do for a child at each stage. So we already said that making demands or threatening consequences or trying to rationalize doesn't work when a meltdown is escalating or at its peak. So that's why the little stop signs above the red arrow, because that's when the brown brain is really in control at the peak of that meltdown. And the brown brain is it's not rational. The only part of the brain that is rational is the blue brain. And remember, from our seesaw, it's left with its little feet dangling in the air. It's not able to do anything. That part of the brain actually shuts off. So rational thinking's not working. Reasoning, problem solving is not working. Even memory shuts down during a crisis or a meltdown. So anything that you try to teach or tell the child at this point, they're not going to remember. So at the very peak of a meltdown, our main goal is just to get the child soothed and calm. And then when they are calm, then we can do some teaching and talking and rationalizing with that child. So some people wonder, we know kids come from some pretty hard home lives, but school is a safe place. So why is the brown brain being triggered at school? So certain children may have an unregulated limbic system, and this makes them more prone to having meltdowns. Excuse me. So they have hypersensitive limbic systems, hypersensitive red parts of their brain. So they're kind of like a home security system that is so sensitive that it goes off every time a bird lands on the roof. It's kind of like that for children. So the threat can be real or even just perceived, but they're very hypersensitive about those threats. And I like this little cartoon here. It says, even if one speck of dirt touches the grid, the entire house is locked down for 72 hours. Pretty cool, huh? So, of course, that type of security system isn't very effective for anybody. So I just said that certain characteristics are associated with a child having an unregulated limbic system. It may be due to their temperament. They could have ADHD, chronic pain, sleep difficulties. If they're on the autism spectrum disorder, have anxiety, or have experienced ACEs, that can all contribute to having an unregulated limbic system. And so ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences. If you've never heard of that before, adverse childhood experiences include things like experiencing abuse of any kind, neglect, having a parent incarcerated, the death of a parent, having a chronic illness, a parent's divorce or separation. All of those are adverse childhood experiences, but we call them ACEs. If you want to ever look that up, you can find lots of information about ACEs and the consequences of them as well. So back to our brain here. The goal is to calm the child and help them feel safe and get back to that blue brain, red brain balance. So how are we going to do that? First, we're going to use strategies that restore safety, and we want to soothe the parts of the lower brain that are aroused. So we want to soothe that brown brain. We want to soothe that red brain. And then when we're back on balance, when blue brain's back online, we can recognize stressors and remove or reduce them in the future to prevent meltdowns in the future. But there's something that we have to do even before that. The first step is to control our own frustrations. And we do that through rational detachment. And what that is, it's the ability to stay in control of your own behavior and not take a child's acting out or their meltdown personally. So little people are overwhelmed by big emotions. It's our job to share our calm and not join in our chaos. When we see a child having behaviors or starting to go into a meltdown, it can put us, throw off our blue brain, red brain balance, right? Because having a child throwing chairs or running out the room is very stressful for us as well. So we have to be able to control our own emotions and behaviors before we're going to be able to help a child. So we're going to have to get ourselves regulated first. And we do that by knowing our stressors, what stresses us out, and being able to recognize our signs of stress, to recognize that when we're feeling frustrated or feeling our balance getting tipped. We have to know how to reduce our stress, and we have to know how to calm and restore ourselves, because a dysregulated child cannot be comforted by a dysregulated adult. So some things to remember to reduce our own frustrations. You have to know what your hot buttons are and how to deal with them. So a hot button is anything that really pushes your buttons, which really makes you upset. So I know, for example, some of my coworkers, their hot button is spitting. When a child spits, that can really push their buttons, and it makes it hard for them to control their own emotions. Mine is talking back or being disrespectful. That really pushes my buttons. So I have to be aware that it does push my buttons. So when it happens, I know that I need to take a step back, take some deep breaths, and come with that child with a calm state. It's also important not to see children's actions as threats to your competence, and instead recognize it as an inability to cope with a stressor. Because sometimes I think teachers take it personally when a child misbehaves, and it's really not about us. It's about that child's inability to cope with a stressor. And it also helps to remember that challenging behaviors are temporary until you can figure out better ways to manage or prevent them. All of those can help to reduce our own frustrations. And then the second thing we have to do is we have to be aware of our own body language and facial expressions. So children are very good at picking up on how adults are feeling. They're very good at picking up our body language and our facial expressions, and especially children that have experienced abuse or trauma. Studies have shown that abused children have enhanced sensitivity to negative facial expressions. So they're more likely to read anger and fear in an adult's facial expression just by a small frown or a raised eyebrow. And that's just a consequence of living in an environment where they're exposed to more cases of hostility and threat. That goes back to that power of or pattern of protection, that they're looking for patterns, and it's just a survival mechanism for them to be able to pick out the slightest frown and perceive it as a threat. So we have to be very aware of our facial expressions, check that we're not frowning or clenching our jaw or furrowing our brow. We have to place our hands in front of our body in a relaxed position. Avoid doing things like crossing your arms or putting your hands on your hips or shaking and pointing your finger. And it also helps too to get on a child's level. So avoid standing or sitting over a child, because standing or sitting over somebody is very intimidating as well. So we want to be on their level and make them feel safe. So some things to avoid when a child is having a meltdown. One thing you want to do is avoid saying the word no. It's a trigger word for a lot of people, not just children. It's a trigger word for adults. How many people like to be told no about something that they want or something they want to get out of? We don't like to hear it, and children don't like to either, and it can actually escalate them. And that's not to say that you have to give them whatever it is they want, but just avoid saying the actual word no. You want to avoid making demands on the child, telling them they have to do this or they have to do that, because the child is already dysregulated. And the more demands that you make, it's just going to overload their system even more. Again, you want to avoid trying to reason with them, because during a meltdown, that logical blue part of the brain, it's not in control. So they don't have the ability to reason or rationalize. And you also want to avoid being judgmental. So avoid using sarcasm. Don't try to dismiss the child's feelings or say something like, it's not a big deal, or that shouldn't bother you. You don't want to blame them, or don't lecture them either, because it can actually escalate the behavior and make it worse. So what can you do? So we're going to go over next some de-escalation strategies: distraction, decreasing stimulation, using reflective listening and validating feelings, offering choices, choosing calming strategies, and co-regulation. So the very first one is distraction. And this one should be used with caution. and it should be used very early in the meltdown. So if you think back to our curve, our meltdown curve, you want to use it at the trigger or agitation, because it won't be as effective if the child's already in full meltdown mode. So you want to use it early, and then you can address the issue that caused the behavior when the child is calm. So just because you're using distraction doesn't mean that you're going to totally avoid the behavior or the situation that caused the behavior, but you're going to address it later when the child is calm. And it also shouldn't be overly used, or can actually become a reinforcer for the behavior. So if you use it too much, the child will think, well, I want that stuffed animal. I'm going to do that behavior because every time I do this behavior, I get that toy or stuffed animal or whatever it may be. So you don't want to use it too much, but it is an option. The second de-escalation strategy that you might try would be to decrease stimulation. So you might encourage the child to go to a calming area. So I highly encourage everybody to have a calming area in their classroom. Just a small section, doesn't have to be big, cozy little place for the child to go and be able to get some privacy. I always said in my calming area, only one child allowed. So just a place for them to go, be by themselves, do some deep breathing, or just get back to regulated. You might try something like dimming the lights, or turning off any music that you might have playing, or if you have a smart board or a computer that's making a lot of noise, you might turn those off. Or you might even have children or other people leave the room or area. Sometimes I've seen when a child's having a meltdown, they try to take the child out of the room, and that almost always results in that behavior escalating, because you're taking the child out of a place where they feel safe and comfortable, which is their classroom, and taking them out into, they don't know where they're going. Are they going to the hallway? Are they going to the principal's office? They don't know. That creates even more danger to them, and which will escalate the behavior. So if you do have a situation like that, I'd say leave the child who's having the meltdown in the room, and have the other children and people leave instead. You also want to use reflective listening, and through reflective listening, you can then validate feelings. So reflective listening just shows that you're actually listening to the child, that you're hearing their concerns and their wants and their needs. And it opens that opportunity to validate feelings. So some examples of reflective listening would be like, so you're saying you want the truck, or you're upset because you wanted to go first. Is that right? So you're just basically repeating back what the child is telling you, to let them know that you hear them. And then after you've done that, you can validate their feelings. Just showing that you accept their thoughts and their feelings and their sensations. It just shows the child that you're on their side, but it doesn't mean that you're saying their actions are okay, but that you're on their side, that you want to help them. You can say things like, it makes sense that you're mad right now, or some empathetic phrases such as, if that happened to me, I would be upset too. And this is a nice little visual from Big Life Journal. You can find this on their Facebook page, but not on their website. But you can, screenshot it, or use a snipping tool on your laptop to copy it and keep a copy of it on your desk or somewhere in the room, just to remind you what an angry child needs to hear. So when a child's angry or upset and you say something like, I can see this is hard for you, it tells the child that they have your attention, and acknowledges the child expressing their feelings. Or if you say something like, I'll stay with you through this meltdown, it tells a child that you're there for them, that they're in a safe environment, and it deepens connection and trust. So I love this little handout. If you want to save that, it's from Big Life Journal on Facebook. So there's nice little reminders about our word choices when children are having a meltdown. Another option for de-escalation is to give children choices. So we said earlier, making demands on a child can escalate a meltdown. So telling them do this or do that. But if you rephrase it in a choice, it's more likely that they're going to cooperate because it gives them some control over the situation. So let's say you're having circle time and a child won't sit down, or he's running around the carpet, or he is having a meltdown because he doesn't want to be there for whatever reason. But you can give him a choice. You can say, okay, do you want to sit on your name, or do you want to sit on a chair? Or do you want to sit next to Billy, or do you want to sit next to Susie? So the expectation to sit is still there, but you're giving them the option and the control of where they're going to do it. It works really well when a child is refusing to do something. And it's important to know that both options should be desirable. So you want them both to be positive things. You wouldn't want to give them a choice like you either sit on your name or you sit in timeout. That's not going to be a good offering of choices for that child because you're really just threatening them to sit. So you want to make sure both of them are positive and desirable. So some examples would be, do you want to clean the blocks or the art area? So if you have a child that doesn't want to clean up, give them a choice. You can clean the blocks or you can clean the art area. Which would you like to do? For a task, if they don't want to do their group work or whatever, let's say your goal is counting, you can say, do you want to count the blocks or you want to count the color bears today? Or an art project, say something like, do you want to paint your project or do you want to use markers? So you're giving them two desirable options to choose from. But giving them that control can really soothe that brown brain. It's also important to teach children calming strategies. Some calming strategies involve deep breathing, movement breaks, other calming activities, which we'll go over here in a minute. But it's important to note that any strategy needs to be taught before the meltdown occurs. So if you're going to teach, or if you want a child to do deep breathing during a meltdown, you're going to have to teach them how to do it before the meltdown occurs. If you think back to our curve there, when a child's at their peak, their learning brain is not open and receptive. So they're not going to remember what you teach them during that time anyway. So you want to teach them while they're calm and then remind them to use it when they're having a meltdown. So some options might be to teach them deep breathing. So breathing deeply and slowly actually activates the hypothalamus to send out neurohormones that block stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline from being released. So it blocks those stress hormones, and then it actually secretes hormones that decrease blood pressure and heart rate, and it results in a relaxation response in the body. So teaching deep breathing is very important for young children. And there are a couple ways that you can teach this. I like this one. It's smell the flower, blow the pinwheel. You can get this printable from challengingbehavior.org and have that website for you at the end. But it's a free download that you can print out. You can go to the Dollar Tree and get a fake flower and a pinwheel for $2 and actually have them practice smelling the flower and blowing hard enough on the pinwheel to make it turn. So that's one way you can teach deep breathing. Or if you've ever heard of conscious discipline, that is a social emotional curriculum that can be purchased and that some schools do choose to use. But they do have a free resource part of their website where you can download this little star, drain, balloon, and pretzel chart. and teach children how to do deep breathing that way. So the star, they stand, they stretch out like a star, because stretching is also a calming strategy, and they're taking deep breaths like the star does. Or the drain, you're pretending that, or teaching them to pretend to be faucets that when you turn the handle, it lets all the water out. So they're blowing the water out. Or being a balloon and blowing themselves up and then letting all the air out and deflating. And then the pretzel, I'm not good at the pretzel. You have to twist your arm in some way, which I'm sure the website will teach you how to do it. But you twist and you stretch and you blow out like a pretzel. So some fun ways to teach children how to do deep breathing. Movement is also a great way to release tension and get back to a relaxed state. Rhythmic movement helps integrate our body and mind. It resets our nervous system and it rewires our brain for healing and wholeness. So the rhythmic movement comes back to when we are in our mom's bellies, that swaying back and forth, that rocking. Our brain learns very early is calming and relaxing. So that's why people like things like taking a walk or swinging on swings, rocking in a chair, or bouncing on a yoga ball, for example. Rhythmic activities are calming. Also, there are a couple of websites that you can get some other movement breaks. So if you've ever heard of Go Noodle, they have a lot of fun gross motor activities, but they also have some good relaxation ones as well. Cosmic Kids Yoga. Yoga is great for kids, especially ones that have anxiety, because when you have anxiety, you're always worried about what's next, what's going to happen to me next. And yoga is all about being in the moment. So it really helps ease kids' anxiety. But Cosmic Kids Yoga is great because the lady that does it, she has like a Spider-Man theme. She has a Frozen theme where she's in Elsa's castle. A Moana one where she's on the beach, and the kids really love that. And then the Learning Station on YouTube is a great kids song videos and songs that they teach you how to do all of the motions and the steps and the movements. So some good resources there if you're interested. And some other calming activities could be to do a puzzle, read a book, draw a picture. Actually, taking a drink of water has a calming effect on people. This is from the challengingbehavior.org website as well, a free download and printable, where you can give the children a choice of how they're going to calm down. So if you see a child that's upset, you can help them to make a choice to calm down or relax. And it's important to give choices because what may work for one child might not work for another. Even what works for one child might not work all the time. So you want to have options. And if you need additional help, you could get input from family, and just having a relationship with that child will help you to determine what works and what will be effective for that child. But sometimes you might have a child who has an especially hard time at calming, or they're not able to pick a strategy and do it on their own. So this child might need what we call co-regulation. And co-regulation is the precursor of self-regulation, or being able to calm and regulate themselves. And so co-regulation is when a child is supported through those stress responses by syncing with a calm adult. So I love this little cartoon. It says, when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. So we're sharing our calm with them. So here is a picture of my little baby son. Reese, he has some meltdowns sometimes, which is very typical, of a 5-month-old baby. But a 5-month-old baby is not able to self-regulate or self-soothe. So what I have to do is I have to share my calm with him. So some things that I might do, simplify my language, try to be, as quiet as you can, use few words, slow movements, soften tone, get on the child's level, validate feelings, no matter how irrational they may be. Listen and let them know what you hear. And match the child's affect is important as well. So I know I have been guilty of seeing a child that's upset and going over and smiling like, it's okay, it's going to be okay. But that sometimes can escalate behavior because the child thinks that I don't understand, right? Because they're upset, I'm smiling. They're like, she doesn't get what I'm trying to tell her. So just taking on like a serious concern type of look will help. So I often use this example because what co-regulation is what we do with a baby. We hold them close. We might sing to them, rock them, whisper to them, use soft voice. So it's a lot like co-regulation. So I like this little visual. I'm a big visual person, if you can't tell. I like things that are simple and easy to help me to remember to do certain things. So I like this one about co-regulation to de-escalate. It just shows you the steps that you're going to regulate yourself first, get yourself calm. Then you're going to get close. You're going to make eye contact. You're going to listen to what the child's telling you. You're going to be curious and seek to understand. So you're going to try to figure out how the child's feeling or what they want to do to feel better. You want to show empathy for that child. The only way that children learn empathy is to be shown empathy. So you're going to want to validate those feelings and tell them things like, I know that must have been hard, or I would have been upset too. Listen again, and then offer warm affection with consent if they're up for a hug or a rock or a cuddle. So how much co-regulation is needed? I like this chart with information because sometimes when children get to preschool, we think they're big boys and girls now. They shouldn't need rocked or cuddled or hugged, but co-regulation will still be needed more than half the time for preschool children. Developmentally younger children, so your children with delays or special needs, are going to need even more. And even elementary children are going to need co-regulation about half of the time. So as they get older, their co-regulation needs will decrease as they practice and learn self-regulation skills. So what happens after a meltdown? We said that after a meltdown, the child is physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted. So we're going to want to let the child relax. Give that child time before rejoining a group or an activity. You might want to give them a reset activity. And what a reset activity is just a very simple task that's neutral. You don't want it to be anything new and exciting, but something like putting together a peg puzzle, if they're able to do that, or pushing pom-poms through a hole in a coffee can, for example. Just something to get their blue brain, learning brain back online before they have to join a group. You want to do the second R, which is reconnect. Let the child know that you still love and care for them, even after, they've had a meltdown, even after they threw a chair at you or ran out of the room. As scary as that is, it's scary for them as well. So just let them know that you still love them and that you care for them. And then after the child is completely calm and you've reconnected, that's when you can reflect. you can talk with a child about what happened and then what can be done in the future to prevent it. Sometimes it's going to be important for you to have a safety net or crisis plan. That's a crisis situation is any that puts the child or property in danger. And the number one concern is safety. So if you're concerned about the safety of the child or safety for others, you have to have this safety net plan in place. And that plan will give you the tools and strategies ready and at hand. So you're not trying to think on the fly about what you should do when a child is running out of the building or when chairs are flying across the room. So what you do is you define what you consider a crisis behavior. You define the strategies that will be used and you identify the roles. So for example, if you have a child that runs away, your strategy might be, and your roles might be, the teacher will run after the child and the teaching assistant will stay in the room with the other children and call the office to let them know. So it's very basic. You will do this, you will do that. Safety net procedures are not designed to try to change the behavior. So you're not going to be talking about reinforcers or intervention plans here. It's just black and white. We will do this, we will do that to keep the child safe. And it should be individualized to each child. So you want to make each one specific for that child and not just go on the internet and say, oh, here's an example crisis plan, let's use it. And then last but not least, we need to work on preventing meltdowns from occurring in the future. We want to be proactive instead of reactive. So we don't want to constantly be reacting to a child having a meltdown. We want to try to be proactive and prevent them from happening in the first place. And Dr. Baker has a quote that I like, is that we want to get to a point where we're no longer just calming the waters in the midst of a storm. We need to predict and prevent the storm from happening itself. So some ways that we can do that, we can identify stressors and try to reduce them. So we want to be a stress detective and look for stressors or triggers. What is causing this child to have these meltdowns? We might have to do it by collecting data or keeping in mind the ABCs of behavior. So antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. What happens before the behavior, during the behavior, and after the behavior. And keeping in mind that all behavior has a purpose or a function. It's to get or to get out of something. So we have to do our detective work and figure out what that child's behavior is a function for. So after we have identified stressors and functions of behavior, we can reduce or eliminate that stressor. It may sometimes be hard to eliminate the stressor altogether, but we could try to reduce it. We could teach the child to manage the stressor or the calm, or we could teach a replacement behavior. So, for example, if a child is running out of the room every time that you're trying to do a task with them, let's say they have a goal of counting, but counting is hard for them. So to avoid it, which is the function, they run out of the room. You could teach a replacement behavior such as letting them have a break card. So a break card is just a little card that says break. They can hand it to you and you say, okay, you can take a break from this task for however long that you determine ahead of time, until eventually you increase the time that they are able to stay in that task before requesting a break. And I like this example too, of thinking about a child's behavior as an iceberg. So what we see is the behavior, right? We see the throwing of the chairs, we see the hitting, we see the screaming, we see the running away. But what we don't see is what's under the surface. They might have a need for connection. They might have sensory needs. They might have basic needs that aren't being met, such as hunger or not getting enough sleep at night. And that's why it's so important to be that stress detective and figure out, or try our best to figure out, I should say, what is going on with this child and what's driving their behavior. And this is a visual that I created, and you can get it from our West Virginia ecpbis.org homepage. And it's just a little printable that you can put up, at your desk or somewhere in your room, just to remind you what to do during a meltdown. Because again, when a child's having a meltdown, we can go into kind of crisis mode ourselves. And when we're in crisis mode, that logical thinking part of our brains aren't online either. So it's hard to think of things. So this is just a great way to be reminded of what to try when a child is having a meltdown. And again, that's free from our website. And here are some resources that I used in compiling this webinar today. The book, No More Meltdowns, Positive Strategies for Dealing with and Preventing Out of Control Behavior. That's by Dr. Jed Baker. You can get that from Amazon. Another great book is You Can't Make Me, Proactive Strategies for Positive Behavior Change in Children. And that's by Dr. Jim Ball, where he goes through the 6 functions of behavior in detail with strategies. And then the Blue Brain, Red Brain Balance that I talked about a lot today is from Dr. Stuart Shanker. And if you just search Blue Brain, Red Brain, Dr. Shanker, you'll get all of his information and research. And that is all for me. If you have any questions, here is my email. And do you have any questions for me today? You can think of? I know it's a lot of information in an hour.
We'll let you know if we have any questions, but we plan on doing the Working with Families webinar. So
okay, great.
Are you doing that one? Are you the presenter?
I am for a third of it, and also Dr. Carlson's going to do some of it, and Kate Morris, the other early childhood BSS, will be presenting as well.
Okay, sounds good. We'll see you then.
All right, thank you so much.